Rick Rude named 10 wrestlers he feared. Or did he? That list you clicked on? It doesn't exist. But the truth behind why that myth exists is way more interesting than any list could ever be. Because Rick Rude wasn't the kind of man who made lists about fear. He was the guy other wrestlers made lists about. So how did one of the toughest men in wrestling history get a fake list attached to his name? And who, if anyone, did he actually respect enough to call dangerous? Let's break down the myth, the man, and the truth behind the ravishing one's reputation. First things first, that video you were looking for does not exist. No interview, no podcast, no shoot tape from some basement in 1998. Rick Rude never sat down and named 10 wrestlers he feared. Not once, not ever. So where did this idea come from? The answer is simple but frustrating. People got confused. They mixed up Rick Rude with Ric Flair. Same first name sound. Both big stars in the 1980s. Both talked about in the same breath when fans discussed the golden era. But they were very different men. Ric Flair actually did make a list. He talked about it in interviews, in his book, and on podcasts. And that list is worth breaking down because these were the gold standard tough guys of that era. The men who made even the Nature Boy nervous. Number 10 on Ric Flair's list was Tim Woods, also known as Mr. Wrestling. Woods was a legitimate amateur wrestler, a shooter who could hook you. That means he could submit you for real if things went sideways. Woods was also famous for protecting the business. After a plane crash, he kept his identity secret to preserve wrestling's mystique. Flair respected that dedication and feared the man's ability to tie him in knots on the mat. Number 9 was Stan Hansen, the man with the lariat. Hansen had a major problem that made him incredibly dangerous. He was legally blind. He couldn't see well in the ring. That meant his punches and clotheslines connected with full force. They weren't worked. They were real. Hansen's potato shots, as they're called, were legendary. A potato is when you actually hit someone for real. Hansen did it constantly because he literally couldn't see where he was aiming. Flair knew that working with Hansen meant taking legitimate punishment. Number 8 was Bruiser Brody, the independent rebel who answered to no one. Brody was notoriously difficult to control. He would stop selling moves if he didn't like how a match was going. He'd walk out of arenas if he felt disrespected. For a champion like Flair, the fear wasn't that Brody would hurt him physically. The fear was that Brody would embarrass him, that Brody would no-sell his offense and expose him as weak in front of thousands of fans. That kind of humiliation could end a career. Number 7 was the Barbarian, Haku's tag team partner and a monster in his own right. The Barbarian possessed superhuman strength. Stories exist of him bending steel bars with his bare hands. He was massive, powerful, and unpredictable. Flair often mentioned the Barbarian and Haku together as a duo you avoided at all costs. If one of them was dangerous, 2 of them was a nightmare. Number 6 was Mad Dog Vachon, an Olympic wrestler from 1948 who transitioned into professional wrestling. Vachon played a crazy character, but he had the amateur credentials to destroy someone if he wanted to. His unpredictability made him scary. You never knew when the act would stop and the real violence would start. Flair traveled the territories in the 70s and saw Vachon's bar fights firsthand. That left an impression. Number 5 was Dick Slater, known as Mr. Unpredictable. Slater was a chaotic brawler who was legitimately unhinged outside the ring. Flair traveled with him and witnessed his violent outbursts. Slater would get into bar fights for no reason. He'd snap without warning. For someone like Flair, who needed to protect his body to stay champion, being around Slater was like being near a loaded gun. You never knew when it would go off. Number 4 was Wahoo McDaniel, a former NFL linebacker who brought real athleticism into wrestling. Wahoo was famous for having the stiffest chops in the business. When Wahoo chopped you, he was testing you. He wanted to see if you were tough enough to hang with the real men. Flair took thousands of Wahoo's chops over the years. Every single one hurt, and Wahoo didn't hold back just because you were the champ. Number 3 was Blackjack Mulligan, a massive human being at 6'9" and over 300 pounds. He was a former U.S. Marine with a mean streak. Mulligan was known for his claw hold, where he'd squeeze a man's skull or stomach until they submitted. He also had a reputation for testing younger wrestlers, hazing them, making sure they could handle the road. Flair and Mulligan had a complicated relationship. They partied together, they brawled together, and Flair always knew that Mulligan could hurt him if he wanted to. Number 2 was Haku, also known as Meng or King Tonga, the toughest man in wrestling history according to almost everyone who ever met him. Haku's reputation is built on dozens of insane stories. He bit a man's nose off in a bar fight. He withstood police mace without flinching. He ripped out a man's eye in a street fight. Multiple wrestlers have said they would rather face anyone else on earth in a real fight than Haku. Even Andre the Giant, who feared almost no one, feared Haku. Flair stated plainly that you don't ever think about messing with Haku. You just don't. And number one on Ric Flair's feared list was Harley Race, the king of the NWA, a man who carried a gun and wasn't afraid to let you know it. Race had immense grip strength. Wrestlers talked about shaking his hand and feeling their bones shift. He had a legendary temper and was the gatekeeper of the NWA World title. If you wanted to be champion, you had to go through Harley Race. And if you disrespected him, you might not walk out of the building. Flair viewed Race as a mentor, but he lived in constant fear of his physical capabilities. Race was the ultimate tough guy of his generation. So that's the real list. Ric Flair's list, not Rick Rude's. The confusion happened because YouTube algorithms don't understand the difference between Rick and Rick. Videos got mislabeled. Reddit threads repeated bad information. Over time, the myth became stronger than the truth. Here's another reason the Rude list can't exist. Rick Rude died in April of 1999. That was before the boom and shoot interviews. Companies like RF Video didn't really take off until the 2000s. That's when wrestlers started sitting down for hours answering questions like, name your top 10 toughest opponents. The structured list format became popular after Rude was already gone. He never had a chance to participate. Now that we've killed the myth and shown you the real list from Flair, let's talk about Rick Rude himself. Because understanding who Rude was means understanding why the idea of him fearing anyone is almost laughable. Rick Rude was born Richard Rude in Robbinsdale, Minnesota, and that high school deserves its own documentary. Robbinsdale High School produced an absolutely insane number of professional wrestlers. We're talking about Curt Hennig, who became Mr. Perfect, Tom Zenk, who had a run in the WWF and WCW, Brady Boone, who wrestled in the AWA, John Nord, who became the Berserker, Barry Darsow, who became Smash and Demolition, and Crusher Khrushchev, and Nikita Koloff, one of the most believable Russian characters, despite being from Minnesota. That's 7 professional wrestlers from one high school in the same era. That doesn't happen by accident. The environment at Robbinsdale was hyper-competitive. These guys grew up wrestling each other, playing football against each other, getting into fights with each other. They formed a fraternity of Minnesota tough guys who would go on to dominate the wrestling business in the 1980s. And in that group of killers, Rick Rude was the enforcer. Curt Hennig was the technician. He had the best mechanics, the smoothest transitions. He was also the class clown, the guy who pranked everyone. But Rude was the physical deterrent. He was the one you didn't mess with. When you grow up sparring with future world champions every single day of your teenage life, the rest of the world stops being scary. You develop a different relationship with violence. It becomes normal, expected, manageable. Before Rudy ever stepped into a wrestling ring professionally, he worked as a bouncer. Not at some fancy nightclub with velvet ropes and bottle service. We're talking about rough bars in Minneapolis. The kind of places where fights broke out every weekend, where people showed up looking for trouble, where weapons were common and the police took their time showing up. Working as a bouncer gave Rude a different kind of toughness than wrestling training ever could. Many wrestlers were tough in the context of a gym or a locker room. Rude was tough in the context of real street violence. He had to de-escalate drunk men who wanted to fight. He had to physically remove people from buildings. He had to deal with situations involving knives, broken bottles, and multiple attackers. That kind of experience changes your psychology. It gives you a confidence that most people never develop. Rude was also a competitive arm wrestler. That might not sound important to casual fans, but in the world of professional wrestling, grip strength is everything. If you can control someone's wrist, you can control their elbow. If you can control their elbow, you can control their shoulder. If you can control their shoulder, you can control their whole body. Grappling starts with the hands. According to grip strength experts and historians who studied wrestling, Rick Rude possessed elite-level hand strength. Some believe he could close a number 4 Captains of Crush gripper. For context, that's a grip strength tool that only a handful of humans on Earth can close. We're talking about world record holders and genetic freaks. If Rude could do that, it meant he could inflict serious pain just by grabbing someone. A handshake from Rick Rude could leave your hand aching for days. Inside the ring, Rude developed a reputation as what wrestlers call a shooter. That's someone who can actually fight, not someone who just looks tough. Rude wasn't a pure technical wrestler in the catch-as-catch-can tradition. He didn't train under Billy Robinson or Carl Gotch, but his striking capability was absolutely feared throughout the locker room. One of Rude's signature moves in real fights was the open hand slap. Most people would throw a closed fist punch, but Rude understood something important about real violence. When you punch someone in the skull with a closed fist, you often break your hand. It's called a boxer's fracture. Your hand has small bones that aren't designed to hit something as hard as a skull. Boxers wear gloves for a reason, but an open palm slap, that can still knock someone unconscious without breaking your hand. The palm is solid. The force transfers through the target's head, and you can work the next night without injury. Rude's preference for the slap showed a cold, calculated approach to violence. He wasn't fighting to prove a point. He was fighting to win while protecting his ability to earn money. Rude was also famous for giving receipts. In wrestling terminology, a receipt is when you hit someone back for being stiff or careless with you. If a wrestler accidentally hurt Rude, or if they were working too rough, Rude would return the favor. He'd light them up. He'd hit them hard enough to remind them of the pecking order. This wasn't about being a bully. This was about establishing standards. If you were going to work with Rick Rude, you had to be professional. If you were sloppy, there would be consequences. This created what could be called a zone of safety around Rude. Opponents knew that if they made a mistake, they would pay for it immediately. So they didn't make mistakes. They were careful. They were professional. They protected him, and in return, he protected them. But if you broke that code, Rude would break you. So if Rick Rude didn't fear anyone, did he respect anyone? Absolutely. And that's a much better question, because respect and fear are completely different things. Fear means you avoid someone. Respect means you recognize someone as an equal, a peer, someone operating on your level of capability and danger. Based on shoot interviews from people who knew Rude personally, we can construct what his list would have actually looked like. Not a list of men he feared, a list of men he respected as equals in lethality. Number 10 on Rick Rude's respect list would be Curt Hennig, Mr. Perfect. This might seem like an odd choice because Hennig wasn't known as a street fighter or a tough guy enforcer, but Hennig was the alpha of the Robbinsdale crew. He was Rude's best friend. They grew up together. They traveled together. They knew each other's capabilities completely. Hennig was a notorious ribber. In wrestling culture, ribs are pranks, but they're also power plays. You only rib people who are on your level or below you. You don't prank someone you're afraid of because that could turn violent. Hennig and Rudy ribbed each other constantly. That meant they saw each other as perfect equals. Neither feared the other. They had complete trust and complete respect. Number 9 would be the Von Erichs, specifically Kevin and Kerry. Before Rude became a WWF star, he worked in Texas for world-class championship wrestling. That was the Von Erich territory. The Von Erich family was wrestling royalty in Texas. Kevin and Kerry were the top stars. They wrestled barefoot. They were high flyers, they were intensely physical, and lived chaotic lives outside the ring. Kevin Von Erich has said in shoot interviews that Rick Rude was incredibly athletic and legitimately tough. Coming from Kevin, that's high praise. The Von Erichs had their own reputation for toughness. In the ring, they were fearless. They would take insane bumps. They worked a brutal schedule, and they had the respect of the Texas crowds, which were notoriously hard to please. Number 8 would be Bruiser Brody. Now here's where it gets interesting. Brody was on Ric Flair's feared list, and with good reason. Brody was notorious for being difficult. He would stop selling moves. He would walk out of buildings. He intimidated other wrestlers and promoters constantly. But Rick Rude defended his WCW world title against Brody in 1986. And according to all accounts, the match went smoothly. There were no incidents, no drama. That tells you something important. Brody, who was a predator, recognized Rude as one of his own. Predators don't hunt other predators. They recognize each other and maintain distance or mutual respect. Rude didn't fear Brody, and Brody didn't try to. Bully Rude the way he bullied other wrestlers. Number 7 would be the Steiner brothers, Rick and Scott. The Steiners were legitimate amateur wrestling standouts from the University of Michigan. Rick Steiner was an All-American. Scott Steiner was a genetic freak with world-class strength. Together, they could out-wrestle almost anyone on any roster using real amateur techniques. Rick Steiner and Rick Rude were close travel partners. In the world of wrestling, shooters travel together. It's a form of mutual protection. If trouble breaks out in a bar or a hotel, you want someone dangerous watching your back. Rude knew that the Steiners could take him down using wrestling technique. He wasn't better than them on the mat, but that didn't create fear. It created respect. Number 6 would be Wahoo McDaniel, the same Wahoo from Ric Flair's list, but for different reasons. Flair feared Wahoo's stiff chops because he didn't want to get hurt. Rude respected Wahoo's chops because they represented the old-school way of doing business. When Wahoo chopped you, he was testing your toughness. Are you a man or not? Can you take it, or will you cry about it? Rude came from a generation that believed in that test. You proved yourself by taking punishment and not complaining. Wahoo represented that philosophy. He was a real athlete, a real tough guy, and someone who commanded respect just by walking into a room. Number 5 would be Harley Race, the king. Race was on Flair's Fear list, but for Rude, it would be pure respect. Race represented the generation that built the business Rude profited from. Race was the NWA World Champion multiple times. He traveled the territories when territories meant something. He defended that title in front of hostile crowds against dangerous opponents. He did all of that while carrying a gun and maintaining a reputation for having a short fuse. The interesting connection is that Rude was managed by Bobby Heenan. Heenan also managed Race and Andre the Giant. Heenan famously stated that Andre feared only two men, Haku and Harley Race. Rude, being a smart man, would have adopted that hierarchy. If the largest, strongest human in wrestling history respected Race, then Rude respected Race. Number 4 would be Stan Hansen, the man with the lariat and terrible eyesight. Hansen wasn't on Rude's list because Rude feared getting hit. Rude got hit all the time. He gave as good as he got. Hansen was on the list because Hansen represented pure intensity. When Hansen worked, he worked stiff. He worked hard. He worked like every match mattered. Hansen also wrestled in Japan, where the style was even stiffer than in America. He became a huge star there. He adapted to a different culture and dominated. That kind of versatility and toughness earned respect from anyone who understood the business. Number 3 would be Dick Slater. Mr. Unpredictable makes the list again, but for different reasons than Flair's fear. Flair was scared of Slater because Slater was crazy and violent outside the ring. Rude respected Slater for exactly those reasons. Slater represented chaos. He didn't care about politics. He didn't care about protecting his spot. He just existed in the moment and did whatever felt right. For someone like Rude, who was very calculated and strategic, Slater was fascinating. He was everything Rude wasn't. Rude controlled his violence. Slater let his violence control him, but that made Slater dangerous in a way that earned respect. Number 2 would be Blackjack Mulligan, the massive Marine with the claw hold. Mulligan tested everybody. He hazed the younger guys. He made sure they could handle the road, and he had the size and strength to back up any threat he made. At 6'9" and over 300 pounds, Mulligan was a physical specimen. Rude respected Mulligan because Mulligan represented the old school testing culture. Wrestling wasn't a business you just walked into. You had to prove yourself. You had to earn your spot. Mulligan was one of the gatekeepers. If you could survive Mulligan's hazing, you could survive anything the business threw at you. And number 1 on Rick Rude's respect list would be Haku, the universal constant, the name that appears on every list, the toughest man in wrestling history according to everyone who knew him. The reason Haku is number 1 on Rude's list is because of the St. Louis bar fight. This story has been told by multiple people who were there. Rick Steiner tells the best version. Steiner, Rude, and Kurt Hennig were at a bar when some Marines started causing trouble. Haku was there too. When the fight broke out, Haku engaged with terrifying efficiency. He bit through flesh. He used his grip strength to disable people instantly. It was brutal and it was over quickly. But here's the critical detail. Rick Rude didn't hide. He didn't run to the bathroom. He didn't leave out the back door. He fought right alongside Haku, back to back. That's the key to understanding Rude's relationship with Haku. Flair feared Haku and avoided him. Rude respected Haku and fought with him as an equal partner. After that night, Rude and Haku had a bond. They both knew what the other was capable of. They both knew they could trust each other in the worst possible situation. That's not fear. That's brotherhood. That's the highest form of respect one tough guy can give another. Now let's talk about the flip side. The men who should have been on a fear list but meant absolutely nothing to Rick Rude, because this proves the negative. This shows that Rude didn't operate the way normal people operate. The Ultimate Warrior is the most famous example. Jim Hellwig was massive. He was the WWF champion. He was protected by Vince McMahon as a top babyface in a major merchandise seller. He was supposed to be untouchable. You didn't mess with the champion, but Warrior had a reputation for being stiff in the ring. He didn't respect the other wrestlers. He was careless with his offense. He hurt people through sloppy work, and he had an ego that made him difficult to deal with. Multiple wrestlers from that era have stories about Warrior being unprofessional. Eventually, Rick Rude had enough. According to multiple sources, including Ric Flair, Rude knocked Warrior out cold with a single punch in the locker room. One punch. Done. The WWF champion laid out on the floor. Think about what that means. Think about the risk Rude took. Attacking the world champion could cost you your job. It could cost you your entire career. It could get you blackballed from the industry. But Rude didn't care. His personal code of respect mattered more than money, more than status, more than job security. Eric Bischoff is another perfect example. Bischoff was an executive in WCW in the late 1990s. He made decisions about who got pushed, who got paid, who kept their jobs. In a normal workplace, employees fear their boss. But Rick Rude wasn't a normal employee. By the late 90s, Rude was dealing with serious injuries. His career had ended in 1994 after his back injury in Japan. He was collecting on a massive insurance policy from Lloyd's of London. When Bischoff tried to interfere with Rude's situation, Rude confronted him. Bischoff practices martial arts. He's trained in Taekwondo, but even Bischoff admits he was terrified of Rick Rude during that confrontation. Some accounts say Rude pulled a gun. Others say he just made it very clear that he was armed and willing to use violence if necessary. Sting represents a different kind of relationship. Sting wasn't someone Rude feared, but he was someone Rude resented deeply. Rude's in-ring career ended in 1994 during a match with Sting in Japan. Sting performed a suicide dive over the top rope. Rude caught him, but when Sting's weight came down, Rude's back struck the raised platform around the ring. For years after, Rude harbored bitterness towards Sting. He blamed Sting for being careless, for not protecting him, for costing him his livelihood. But that wasn't fear. That was anger. That was resentment. To really understand Rick Rude and why the concept of him fearing anyone is absurd, you have to understand the culture he came from. The 1980s and 90s wrestling locker rooms were completely different from modern wrestling. There were no corporate HR departments, no wellness policies, no rules against bullying or hazing. The locker room was governed by an unwritten code. Every territory had a policeman. This was a wrestler the promoter trusted to handle problems. If some tough guy from the crowd came backstage looking for a fight, the policeman would deal with it. Rick Rude wasn't an official policeman, but he functioned as a locker room enforcer anyway. His presence alone prevented problems. The receipt economy was a big part of maintaining that order. If you hit someone too hard in a match, they would hit you back harder. That transaction created balance. Rude's matches were what wrestlers call snug. That means tight contact, real hits. You felt it when Rude hit you, but because everyone knew he would give receipts for careless work, they were extra careful with him. The drug culture of that era also played a massive role in the fearlessness of guys like Rude. Steroids were everywhere. Painkillers were handed out like candy. When you're on massive amounts of testosterone, your aggression increases. Your confidence increases. Some of Rick Rude's fearlessness might have been chemically enhanced. Because Rick Rude died in 1999, he missed the entire boom of the shoot interview industry. He never sat down for a you-shoot video. He never did a timeline series. Those interviews were where the list format really took off. Rude never had to commodify his toughness. He never had to sell his memories. His legacy was created by other people telling stories about him. So let's bring this full circle. Rick Rude never named 10 wrestlers he feared. That list is a myth. It's a digital ghost that exists because people confused Ric Flair with Rick Rude. But the fact that people believe the list could exist tells you something profound. Even a fake story about Rick Rude's fear is compelling because the idea of Rude being afraid of anyone is so unusual. The truth is better than any manufactured list. Rick Rude was forged in competition, sharpened by violence, tested constantly in locker rooms full of legitimate tough guys, and he never backed down. Instead of a list of men he feared, history gives us men he respected. Number 10, Curt Hennig. Number 9, the Von Erichs. Number 8, Bruiser Brody. Number 7, the Steiner Brothers. Number 6, Wahoo McDaniel. Number 5, Harley Race. Number 4, Stan Hansen. Number 3, Dick Slater. Number 2, Blackjack Mulligan. And number 1, Haku. History also gives us men who should have intimidated Rude but didn't. The Ultimate Warrior, Eric Bischoff. Sting. Men with power and status who Rude refused to fear. Rick Rude's story is a tragedy in many ways. His career ended too soon. His body broke down, but his legend remains intact because Ric Flair feared for his safety. Rick Rude was the danger. If you enjoyed learning the truth about one of wrestling's most legitimate tough guys, hit that like button. Drop a comment and tell us who you think would have made Rude's real list. And subscribe because we're diving deep into more wrestling legends. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next one.